I think the interest in the university that people have now, it's not just nostalgia. The essence of it, the great independent research institution that it is, the undergraduate college dedicated to teaching, in the midst of the riches of resources and people, continue to be unique. There isn't anything like the University of Chicago. And for the person to whom that is of interest, there is still no other place.
We came here in the autumn of 1893. A half a dozen buildings had been the U of C. Cobb Hall was then the only place where we could daily flunk. And in the dear old Drexel dorm was the only place to bunk.
My name is Lorraine Richardson Green, and I came to the University of Chicago with a husband on the 4th of August, 1916. We walked through Hull Gate, and it seemed that we had hit an electric current. This place seemed so great, so laden with the history of mankind. So I did apply myself, because my husband and I seemed to think that this university, this was shaping our lives.
Since first we cast our lot with thine in 1893. Oh, Chicago, how great you've grown to be. Since first we cast our lot with thine in 1893.
The more I read about Harper, he was obviously, even after 100 years, the central figure in the life of the university. I mean, the university sprang full-grown from his brow. And the achievement, even now, to look back, is staggering.
James Weber Lynn, who was one of my deans, said that you had to have dinner at Dr. Harper's before you could be a member of the faculty. And that was your final test. And if you didn't meet his standards as a dinner guest, you didn't get on the faculty.
I'm strong for Chicago, C-H-I-C-A-G-O.
The university opened its door in October of 92. The fair began in the spring of 93. I think there always was, on the part of the university at least, a sense that they were locating here in Chicago to be at the center of the most dynamic city in America.
I first came in 1918 when the war was on. They wanted to put me in education, but I didn't think education was a science or even respectable. I wanted the sciences. With the famous Dr. Henry Chandler Coles, who was almost the first ecologist.
The kind of easy friendliness of the faculty that I encountered. Easy friendliness, but at the same time, rigorous expectations of what you were going to do and be was exactly the kind of thing I loved.
We found, when we got here, as generations of students have found, that enthusiasms and interests were honored here, were fashionable here, that you didn't have to be apologetic about reading a book or about the fact that you might play the violin, which I hasten to say I never did.
As I recall it, there was very little in the way of continuous lecture on the part of the professor. You learned rather quickly that you better come prepared, and you would then find that questions would be put to you, raising points that had never occurred to you.
We had about 2 or 3 freshmen in our pledge class who I contended seriously were being horribly indoctrinated by Mortimer Adler. So they arranged for a discussion between their great professor and their fraternity brother. I think that my fraternity brothers from that time on said, well, maybe you didn't win, but you certainly didn't lose.
Stand fast, Chicago will win. Stand fast, we'll never give in.
I was as green as grass. I mean, I was coming from this little town in New Mexico. I had never been east of Kansas City. I remember very vividly activities night during orientation week. I went to Idenois Hall, walked up this little flight of stairs there, and right in front of me was a heroic-size photograph of someone I'd never seen before. "Who's Eugene V. Debs?" I said.
It was a fun time in a lot of ways. I can recall, for instance, that one of the favorite episodes during Hell Week was to send one of the pledges down to Cicero with a lantern and a sign hung around his neck that he was, quote, looking for an honest man.
For it's a Blackfriar time again. It's the glorious springtime when fellows take their girls to the Blackfriar show, for it's sure to be a good date they know. Yes, it's Blackfriar time, so gay, in the loveliest month of May.
The songs I liked were the old football songs, which, of course, having gone through the Hutchins years, were not practiced much, but C stands for cherished courage, H for her honor high, I for her iron-bound interest, C for her college cry, Chicago.
A for her aim so ardent, G for her gallantry, O stands for old man, the best coach in this land, the big C for victory.
One of the things that I think set our class a little bit apart, or made it feel sort of special, was that we were the first class under the Hutchins new plan. We were, in many ways, guinea pigs, and we knew it and we sort of enjoyed it, I think.
People who say that we literally ate, slept, drank the program in the college are absolutely right.
As a young person, literally be taken up on the heights and encounter the best in human thought and experience. Merrill Coulter, bless him, sitting in Kent Hall as a person who would probably never touch science seriously again for the rest of his life. The best course I took that year was his introduction to biology.
Edith Abbott offered a course in public welfare. I was astounded at her absolute devotion to the welfare of the country and the people. She wasn't a person you could get exactly chummy with, but her voice boomed out over the audience, you see, and you could not miss the word she said.
I remember Norman McLean in a poetry class, and I remember David Green. Maynard Kruger was here. Anton Carlson in that Bi-Sci lecture in which he swallowed a balloon. And I never will forget in my freshman year, December 7th, and we were all so stunned. And Robert Maynard Hutchins spoke to us and said to deliberate this event, see how we could best fit into it.
To those who value freedom, truth, and justice, to those who are anxious for democracy, to those who mournfully watch the disintegration of all that Western man has struggled for, this university offers a symbol of faith and hope.
Hutchins continues to be a figure who excites lively controversy. Whatever one says about Hutchins, he was in many ways the best known, the wittiest, for some I think the most humane and persuasive college president of his era.
I had the unusual experience of learning that they were going to pay $80 a week for working under the West Stands. We worked on making the graphite blocks. I really didn't realize what I had been a part of until I was in North Africa when the bulletin board said that a bomb had been exploded in New Mexico. And I said to myself, that was it. That was what we were doing.
At the time, Chicago probably had the best physics department in the world. Led, of course, by Enrico Fermi, but there were many, many others of great stature. One has to comment on Enrico Fermi. He was a physicist who could do everything. I was too intimidated by him to ever even ask to work for him. I remember at that time we had picnics, and I'll remember once I was batting and he was pitching, and I was scared to death I was going to knock the ball right at him, and so I think I deliberately struck out.
You've got 95 condensers and an audiograph that hums, 10 electrodynamometers, 5 magnetomotive drums. But amid the flock of pointers, always heed the danger sign. If the capsometer oscillates beyond the yellow line. When the capsometer...
That was Mike Nichols, who's quoted as saying, the University of Chicago was wonderful, everybody was a weirdo. So there was a great camaraderie. There was also a sense of being embattled, which promoted that sense of community.
Over NBC's Coast to Coast Network, the University of Chicago Roundtable. To open the program, we present Lawrence A. Kimpton, Chancellor of the University of Chicago.
There are facts about our university which, though taken all together, make it unique.
Here Larry Kimpton came with the following simple problems. The budget was totally out of control. We had an attempt at a college which had failed. And then we had the neighborhood. There wasn't a single pleasant job that he had to do. And the whole time, he was absolutely unflappable. And in a very real sense, he preserved this university.
It would surprise me to find that anyone passed through the University of Chicago and was indifferent to the experience.
Mr. Levy used to say in some of his characteristically understated remarks about the university that it was not the best university going, it was the only university going.
Yes, there were people who sincerely, absolutely hated it. There are those days when one is making one's way across the Midway in the dead of February and the wind is howling off the lake at 50 miles an hour. And can you imagine being the valedictorian at Bronx Science and then coming to the University of Chicago and finding that you were a dime a dozen?
This is not a place where you expect to hear the Glee Club singing the alma mater outside your windows on a warm night in June. But one of its charms is this prickliness. And I think that students even now continue to feel that if they have survived and even perhaps flourished, that's greatly to their credit, because they get nothing automatically.
The tradition that Harper started continues. He had extremely high standards. The first person he picked in physics was Albert Michelson, who also turned out to be the first person to win a Nobel Prize. The second American to win was Robert Millikan, who was also on the faculty. The third American was Arthur Holly Compton, also here.
The Nobel laureate of Physiology or Medicine, Professor Huggins.
Your Majesty, members of the Swedish Academy, ladies and gentlemen. After the nightingales have sung, the other birds should be still. It is very difficult for
When I was out here, there were so few blacks. I was one of them, the first one to get a master's degree in sociology with Park and Burgess, the greats. Now we have Dr. Hannah Gray. And I told her, I said, you know, I had my master's degree on this campus before you were born. William Rainey Harper, the man who started the university. She looks up there at his picture. Bill's always looking at her, she said. Bill was a smart guy. Smart enough to influence John D. Rockefeller to give the money for the University of Chicago. And this is that university's 100 years. I'll celebrate with the University of Chicago